Okay, we'll have a go at starting there. Welcome to today's session. My name is Simon. I'm Casio's principal trainer, and I'm going to be your host today for the webinar that will hopefully familiarize you with the 83 and 85 ClassWiz handset. Okay, so 83, 85, essentially the same functionality, the difference being that one of them has a solar charging panel on it. One of the main reasons that we are hosting these webinars because we have some questions about the differences, the upgrades that we have to the handset. So just setting out what Casio does to provide support for both teachers and students. We do offer teacher training so that both students and teachers can benefit from improved usability of the handsets. We've got the emulators that are freely available so that things can be demonstrated in class. We do student revision webinars and training webinars, this being one of them, familiarization webinars, and there are also loan sets available for the graphing handset. So if you manage to continue your mathematical career, say to A level, perhaps, then you may be interested in using the more advanced graphing calculator. So please bear that in mind. The reason that we changed the handsets, or upgraded them, as I like to think, is that for 20 years, essentially, they've been the same. We've made them more usable, so the navigation is slightly more intuitive. There were some updates that needed to be made to certain values, and the improved functionality, say, between calculate and table has been improved. And essentially, there were supply shortages for making the older handsets. But one of the key changes when using the handset is what has happened to the standard to decimal key. It has been replaced, shall we say, with format. Now, if you're not aware of format, or if you've been using it and you're not sure how to use it effectively, I'll describe that in today's session. But it does allow you to display the different types of format for the same values. Okay, so it does help understanding what your calculation result should be. There is always the option, if you want decimals as a solution, you can use format. Or if you want decimals for every calculated value, you can use either shift and execute, which does give you an approximate decimal value, but it does recalculate what's on the screen. Or you can change the settings to math in and decimal out, so you will always get decimal values. And I'll demonstrate both of those in this session. Hopefully you can follow along at home using your own handset, but we're going to start by performing a fairly straightforward addition of two fractions. So you would need to press home to get to the home screen and select calculate with OK. We can enter our fractions as you would expect using fraction templates. So I can enter 3 as my numerator, and then the fraction template allows me then to enter 16 as my denominator. Notice that when you use templates, the previously input entries are slightly grayed out, and your most recent input is in bold. Scroll to the right and then add. Notice the cursor, the size of it, is allowing you to input add. And then we need to enter the mixed number using the mixed number template. So you can see on the handset, on the emulator, that that is a blue label. So it's a modified label. So I need to press Shift first, placing a little S at the top of the screen that tells you that the next input is one of the blue labels. Press the fraction template to get the mixed number template and enter 4, scroll across, numerator, scroll down, denominator, and then execute to get your value. So 34/7. Now, you may not necessarily be getting that displayed value on your screens. And that is because that your settings may not necessarily be the default settings. You may have changed them depending upon work you've been doing previously. So what we're now going to have a go at doing is resetting the handset so that you know that your settings are the default ones. So you should then be getting the same as the displayed emulator. So to do that, we need to go to Settings. And there are various choices here: Calc Settings, System Settings, and Reset. We're going to scroll down to Reset and choose that with OK. Now, OK and Execute are interchangeable. Okay, so you can use either of those. When you select OK, you get three options: Settings and Data, Variable Memory, and Initialize All. These should be familiar choices if you've used a scientific calculator previously. We are going to have a go at initializing everything. So scroll down using the scroll keys and choose Initialize All with OK. You then get to a confirmation screen where it says, would you like to initialize all, or would you like to cancel? We are going to choose yes with OK, and that resets the handset. So if we now perform the calculation again, so we've gone to the home screen, choose calculate with OK, and then we can enter 3/16. Oops, sorry, 16ths. There you go. Scroll across and add, and then remember it's shift and fraction template for mixed numbers. Or if you didn't use the mixed number template and just put 4 and then fraction template, that would be actually a multiplication. Okay, so 75 and 112. So you should be getting 34/7 now. I should mention that if you do have any questions, please ask them in chat, and I'll try to answer them at the end of the session. Now, 34/7 may not necessarily be the value that you want to write down. So we're now going to have a look at using Format. If you press Format, just next to Execute, you can see that you're presented with a menu of Standard. Now, the default settings for the handset are to display an improper fraction. That's why it's 34/7. You could scroll down to decimal if you want, and then Execute. And that will present the decimal to the default degree of accuracy. See, there are plenty of decimal places available there. Or alternatively, what if you would like to present this value as a recurring decimal? So we can use Format again, scroll down to Recurring Decimal and choose OK. And you can see that we now have the notation for the recurring decimal. So not as detailed as the full decimal above, but you can get the recurring decimal if needed. But also, what if you would like a mixed fraction? So again, use Format. We already have improper fraction. We can scroll down and you can see that there are more choices available. Let's choose mixed fraction. And you can see that it now presents 34/7 as 4 6/7. So just a brief demonstration of how useful Format can be to present the value that you've calculated in the way that you want. Okay. Moving on from this calculation, we can actually change the settings from the default settings that we have after resetting to those that may be more useful for us. So if we choose Settings again, various options we have are Calc Settings, System Settings, and we've already had a look at Reset. The System Settings, if we just show you those, they will change the contrast of your screen and show you, allow you to change the automatic power off. So for example, how long the screen stays lit. We can use the back key, okay, to move up a menu level. So we use that, and that goes back to settings generally. Scroll up to Calc Settings and choose OK. And we have various settings now, and we're going to have a look at a number of these in this session. But at the moment, we're just interested in input and output. If we choose that, we can see the default is math in and math out. So that's why you get an improper fraction as your output at the moment. If we scroll down, we can highlight math in and decimal out. Now this will always display a decimal as your output now. So if we choose that with OK, you can see that the radio buttons have now changed and that math in, math out has been selected. If we choose back now, and we can use it a couple of times, back to our input screen, notice because we've changed the settings, that what has happened is the calculation has been deleted. Okay, so if we then were to calculate that again, we would get the decimal output. Okay, what we can also do within settings, so choose settings again and calc settings, we could, if we wanted to, instead of changing the math in and math out to math in and decimal out, we could change the fraction result. So instead of getting an improper fraction as a default, you could change it to a mixed fraction if you wanted to by choosing OK. All right. If we now then move on to other calculations, so we have a look at using format, we have a look at changing settings. If I go back now, what if I wanted to choose number format? Okay, just to demonstrate, if I do 1 divided by 600, or I could do 1 over 600 using the fraction template, that is what I get now because I've changed the settings to decimal out. Okay, if I then choose settings and change the number format, so choose that with OK again, I have various options available. I can then fix the number of decimal places or the significant figures and have it in exponential format, or I could change between normal 1 and normal 2, which is how you would display different decimal places. Sorry, not different decimal places, different ways of presenting values that are quite small, say. Let's have a go at fixing the number of decimal places. So we are going to choose that with OK. Let's go for 3 decimal places. Choose OK, and then go back. And what happens is if we replay the calculation, so if I scroll left, notice the cursor goes to the end of the input line. And now when I execute again, it calculates, but because I have set the value to 3 decimal places, we get a different decimal. Okay. Notice there that it has been rounded. Alternatively, let's have a go at changing the scientific presentation, so the significant figures. Calc settings again, number format with OK, choose SCI, and then let's go for 3 again. Okay, so you can see that it tells you that it will present it as, in this case, 1.23 times 10 to a power, for example. Choose that, and you have 3 displayed. Let's go back to our calculation, and if we scroll left again, we can now replay with execute, and we get the same value displayed ever so slightly differently because of the change in our number format. Okay. Again, notice it has been rounded. Finally, we can have a look at norm. So settings again, calc settings, scroll down to number format, OK, and choose norm. Now the default is norm 2, where you get a full decimal displayed. If we change it to norm 1, for particularly small values, less than 100, let's say, it will always displayed exponentially. So if I choose that, we have norm 1 displayed. Let's go back. Let's now scroll left again, and when we replay with execute, notice again we get a different presentation of the value. Okay, again, final decimal place being rounded. So there you have various different ways for displaying the value to suit your needs. Okay, very easy to change and access. Next thing we can have a look at is one of the more interesting developments for this handset is the ability to define a function. And actually you can define two different functions on this handset. So within calculate mode, and you can do this in other modes as well, but calculate is where we are at the moment. What we can do is use the function key. If we choose that, there are several options available there. You have f of x and g of x, so that is how you can use f of x and g of x within templates or evaluate. And we have the ability to define both of them. So if you scroll down to define f of x and choose OK, you get to f of x equals, and then we can enter our displayed quadratic. Now the x variable is just under the blue shift key. It has been relocated from previous models, and then you can use the square. Notice the cursor allows you to enter the square without having to scroll across. If you were going to use the power key, so for cubics, for example, you would have to then scroll to move the cursor for further entry. We can then subtract 2 lots of x and then subtract 3. So notice the natural display entering it as it is written. We can confirm that with OK or execute, and it goes back to the input screen. You can also define a second function, g of x. So let's use f of x again. Scroll down to define g of x and choose OK. Now you can define g of x as another function, but one of the nice things here is that you now have the ability to define g of x in terms of f of x. So we're actually going to define it as f of 2x here. So that means we need to press the function key again. And we only have the option for f of x now, because obviously you can't define g of x in terms of g of x. You can only define it in terms of f of x, or adjust in terms of x. So let's choose that with OK, and we have f of. Enter 2x and close the parentheses, and then we can add the 3. Okay, and then you can confirm with OK or execute. So we've now defined two functions, f of x and g of x. This is useful because now you can have a go at evaluating these functions. So we're going to try and find a f of 12 and g of 14. A couple of ways you can do this. The first way I'm going to show you is by using table. So if we choose home and scroll across to table, select with OK, and you get the default table screen of an X column and an F of X column. Okay. What you want, however, is an f of x and a g of x column. So to do that, we're going to use the tools key. So this is a brand new key. And you can see that that allows you to define the table range. You can also define f of x and g of x here if you want. And it tells you what sort of table type you can have. If we scroll to table type and OK, the default is just f of x. I would like an f of x and g of x, so I'll choose that with OK. You can see that the radio button has now been selected, and now I can go back. Scroll up to table range, and this allows you then to set the values of x that will be used to calculate the values of f of x and g of x. Select table range with OK, and you can see the default settings goes from 1 to 5 up in integers. Well, because we're looking for f of 12 and g of 14, I would like to start at 10. So I can just enter 10 and then confirm with OK. And I'd like to end at 15. So let's end at 15 and confirm with OK again. I could change these steps, but integers are quite useful, especially as we want 12 and 14. Scroll down, and this then allows you to execute, either with OK or execute. This then populates the table, and as you would expect, you can scroll down through the X values and scroll across as well to highlight the particular value that you're interested in. So you can see f of 12 is 117 and g of 14 is 728. As you may have done on previous handsets, you can also edit X values if you want. So perhaps you may be interested in having X as a decimal. So you can enter a particular value if you like. And then when you execute, this will recalculate. So you can see that the values in the table have been recalculated, but also that the table values are truncated. So notice you get a truncated value in the table, but a full decimal displayed at the bottom of the screen. So please bear that in mind. So we have our two values, f of 12, g of 14. Perhaps you may not want to create a table. So it depends on context if you wanted other values of fx, g of x, or if you wanted just a single value. We can do that within Calculate. So if we choose Home and then scroll back to Calculate and OK, we can then use the function key to evaluate f of x. So choose f of x and we get f of, and this allows you to input a value, close the parentheses, and calculate with execute. We can also, if we wanted to, we could perform f of 2x plus 3, which is g of x. So let's use the function key again, choose f of x, and we could do the calculation 2 times 14. So this would now calculate g of 14, close the parentheses, and add 3. Okay, just to demonstrate that there are different ways of approaching this evaluation. Or you could just do a straightforward g of x by using the function key. So here we have g of, entering the value 14, and evaluating for 728. So hopefully you can see this is quite useful, either generating several values in a table or just individual values using the function. But one of the things that you may be interested in doing is if you have evaluated one of these functions, you might want to store that value for later calculation. So what we can do now is we can use the variable key. So variable just to the right of the shift key, and that displays variables A to F. Okay, and you can store values there. You also have X, Y, and Z. Notice that X has been displayed as 2.566 because that was the last value of X that I entered in the table. If I want to store a variable, so I'm going to attempt to store 728, I can store it as any of these variables just by scrolling to them so that they are highlighted, and then I can press OK. So to store as A, I will press OK, and I get the options to store, recall, or edit. I would like to store, so press OK. And that has now stored the variable A as 728. And I can confirm that because if I press variable again, you can see that A is 728. Okay. Now that is going to come in handy later on. So what we could do is have a look at more format options. So for the value 728, if I go back, there is 728. If I press format now, notice that I get my standard and decimal, but the menu has changed ever so slightly. Remember that the third place used to be recurring decimal. So format is responsive to the input on the screen, or should I say the output on the screen. So now I can actually have a go at factorizing my value. If I scroll down to highlight and OK, it has performed some prime factorization. So that is how you would do that. You wouldn't need to go through a separate menu. It's all within the format key, so presenting particular values in a certain way. What I should also mention, you may not need to know this, but it's also quite possible to do a function of a function and evaluate that as well. So if I use the function key, we can have a go at doing f of g of 6. So let's use f of, and then do g of, and I can evaluate that, making sure I have the correct number of parentheses. So that's g of 6. Okay, so that is in fact where you would substitute 6 into what is it, f of 2x plus 3. Okay, and then you would do the function f, which is our quadratic. Okay, so maybe have a go later at attempting that with pen and paper, see if you get the same value. Moving on from format, let me introduce you to a brand new key for this handset. It's this catalog. Okay, so if we were to investigate f of 12 and g of 12, catalog is quite a nice key. This is where functionality that may not be apparent from the labels on the keys is. Okay, so if you were used to previous labels on keys where they may have 2 functions per key, if you can't see that functionality, you would now use catalog. So functional analysis is the first option. If I choose that with OK, there are logarithms available, 3 different types depending upon your needs. I can go back, and if I choose probability, this is where the percentage functionality is available. Also factorials, NPR and NCR. Can you see on the right, there is a scroll bar. You can use the scroll keys to scroll down, but just mentioning the page scroll, this key here, it will then scroll to the next available page. Okay, and you can see that this is also where we have random numbers and random integers available. So for example, if you were trying to, I don't know, select a card number from a pack of 52, this is where you could generate a random number such as 33, or using random numbers, that would be somewhere between, what is it, 0 and 1 in thousandths, I think it is. Okay. If we go back and scroll down to numeric calc, this is quite nice. This, if you choose OK, this now enables us to find out the GCD or LCM, so greatest common divisor, or HCF if you prefer, and LCM, lowest common multiple. Okay, so we're actually going to have a go at investigating these values, f of 12 and g of 14. So choose GCD with OK, and then enter these 2 values. You do need to separate them with a comma. That is a modifying label. You may have spotted it. It is on the close parentheses. So I need to press Shift first and then close parentheses. Then 728, close the parentheses and execute to calculate. So what we have there is the greatest common divisor or highest common factor of those 2 values. The reason I'm showing you this is because there is an alternative way of approaching this. Remember, we did store G of 14 earlier. So what we could do is actually edit this calculation. So if I scroll left again, so I could replay the calculation, but this then allows me to edit it. I can scroll inside the parentheses and then use the delete key. And then I could actually do f of 12. So this is quite nice if f of 12 wasn't a nice neat integer, maybe a decimal that you don't like, you don't want to write it all down and potentially make an error. I could do f, so function key, f of, and actually use f of 12. I need to close the parentheses and then another comma. Now, G of 14 we stored as A, so I can use the variable A. Again, these are modifying labels, so choose Shift, and you can see that the variables label 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So let's choose 4 for A, and then we can calculate again, and we will get the answer of 13. So a very nice way of not necessarily actually evaluating f of 12, but using the functionality of the handset. Sometimes it may be useful to have a look at numeric calculations more in depth. So let's have a go at investigating this recurring decimal. So if we would like to enter a recurring decimal, a couple of ways of approaching this. I can do 0.41 and then the 6 is recurring. So you may have spotted that as the label on the square key. So that would be Shift and the square key, and then you would enter a value. Or just to show you that sometimes there are duplications in the way that you can enter things, if I choose catalog and scroll down a bit too far to numeric, you can see I'll scroll down to recurring, choose OK, and I get the same input box. Okay. If I enter 6 there and then execute, I get a decimal output. Notice that we changed the settings earlier, so I will get a decimal output, and it is rounded. Okay. Perhaps you want a slightly different format to that. So if I choose Format, I can then scroll down to Recurring, and I get my recurring decimal. Or if I choose Format and scroll down to say to a mixed fraction or an improper fraction, either of those, I can display it as 5/12. But what if you start with a fraction? If I enter 5/12 and execute, notice we get the default, well, sorry, not default, but the settings that we have changed to decimal out all the time. I could turn that using Format into a recurring decimal if I wanted. Okay, so a nice way of interchanging between different formats, fractions, decimals, and recurring decimals. But there is one further option that we could use. We can have a look at sexagesimal. So within Format, I can use page scroll, scroll all the way down, and if I select that, notice it now displays it as hours, minutes, and seconds, which is very nice because that allows you to do some time calculations, for example. So here we have a question that says, I would like to add 5/12 of an hour to 2.6 hours and 52 minutes. Now, because we've already entered 5/12, I could use the answer functionality. So that is just above 7. And then I can add. If I would like to add 2.6 hours, a couple of ways you could do this. Again, notice you've got hours, minutes, and seconds as the label for addition. Or within catalog, you can scroll down to angle, choose that with OK. And this is how you would enter degrees, radians, and gradients, not changing the settings, but entering those as input. Use the page scroll all the way down to degrees, minutes, and seconds. choose OK, and you can see that you could enter hours, minutes, or seconds there. So what I'd have to do is scroll in front of that and enter 2.6. Okay. I can then scroll across and add, and if I use the different impact format, what I can do is add a 0 hours and 52 minutes. You always have to enter hours, so that is 0, shift and add. Notice the same notation. And then I can enter 52 minutes, so that's shift and add again. And when I calculate, I get the decimal output because those are the settings that we have. Describing time in terms of decimals, not particularly very useful. So what you can do is use format again. And then if we scroll down again using sexagesimal, you can display it as 3 hours, 53 minutes. Okay, so quite handy for doing time calculations, perhaps when dealing with speed, distance, and time, something like that. Next thing we can move on to is statistics. So if we choose home, we can scroll across to statistics and select OK. This is where it asks you, would you like one variable or two variable? We're going to have a look at both of these. So let's choose one variable to start with. And by default, you have the X column and a frequency column, which does match what we are trying to input. If you want to turn the frequency on and off, use tools. Okay, this allows you to edit. So you can insert a row or delete all. And on frequency allows you to turn it on and off. And you can also use this to sort. So sort ascending and descending for X and also for the frequency. If we go back, we can now enter our data. So 1 and execute. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. Scrolling down and across, notice by default it puts a frequency of 1 in there, but we need to change those. So let's do 2, 1, 6, 7, and 13. Once you have entered your data, you may want to have a look at doing something with it. So let's have a look at finding the summary values for this data. If we press OK, we have two options, one variable results or statistics calc. If you choose the results with OK, it will display the summary stats. So X bar, which is your mean, sum of X, so that's all the data added, sum of X squared, and then you get into your deviations. So variance and standard deviations. Use page scroll down to see that you've got a minimum value, your quartiles, Q1 and Q3, and your median, Q2, and then your maximum value as well. So all the data that you may need to do some calculations. If we want to use these summary values, we do something slightly different. What we do is we go back and then we choose OK again. We want to use statistics calc. Choose OK, and that takes you to a very familiar screen, possibly, if you used Scientifics before. But slightly different way of recalling this data. We are now going to use catalog. And you can see that the catalog menu has changed. So statistics is now first. Still got functional analysis, probability, and numeric calc. If we choose statistics, various options, summation, mean, variance, deviation, min, max, and quartiles. Okay. If you want to choose the mean, for example, scroll down, select, and there you have the various options. If you choose mean, you can multiply it, you can add things to it. So For example, what is 10 lots of the mean? There you have a calculation. Okay. Moving on with statistics, what we can actually do as well is use paired data, so x's and y's that are linked. To access this, we can go back, keep going back until you get the choice of one variable or two variable, scroll down and choose two variable with OK. It asks you whether you would like to clear the data, which we would. And you get the default choices of an X column, a Y column, and a frequency column. We don't need the frequency, so as described before, we will use Tools to turn it off. And then we can go back and enter our data. So first, the X data, 1, 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9. Down and across to the top of the Y column, 4, 8, 6, 9, 16, and 17. Okay, so we've entered our data, and if we actually want to do something with this, so for example, perhaps you were drawing a scatter diagram, you may want the line of best fit, we can actually perform some regression calculations, which could be quite useful. We choose OK. Two variable results would give you the summary statistics, so X bar, Y bar, sum of X, sum of Y, and so on. The regression results, we can perform various types of regression. So the first one is linear or quadratic, logarithmic, exponential, and so on, and there are more options available. If we stick with linear, choose OK, and what happens is that we get a value of A and B. So for example, A in this case would be your y-intercept and B would be your gradient. So that could be a line of best fit, or you could draw that and compare it to your line of best fit. Also, we get the regression statistic R to show you how good the data is when compared to a straight line. Okay. Now, if we wanted to use these values, we would need to go back again, press OK, and choose Statistics Calc as before. It asks you whether you would like the linear. Choose that with OK. So again, a familiar screen. Choose Catalog, where Statistics is at the top again. And this time you can scroll down to Regression, and it allows you to choose A and B, so you can manipulate those if you like. We also get X hat and Y hat, so estimated values that are on the regression line. So quite nicely, you can do some calculations from there if needed. The next thing I can show you about the handset is a new mode. If we go to Home, you can see that we have got MathBox. I'm not going to describe ratio because that is exactly the same as ratio on previous handsets, and how to use it as well. MathBox, if we choose that, there are four options: dice roll, coin toss, number line, and circle. Dice roll and coin toss allow you to simulate either rolling a dice or tossing a coin, so nice and quiet. If we have a look at dice roll, choose that with OK. And you can see that you can change the number of dice or the number of attempts. If we scroll across, you can see that I can either use 1, 2, or 3 dice. In this example, let's use 2. Select with OK. And for the number of attempts, you can try between 1 and 250. So depending upon whether you are investigating probability or relative frequency, the number of attempts would give you perhaps more accurate results. So let's just stick to 5. So let's select with OK or go back. So there you go. And same result. Now, if there is a classroom of students using these handsets, you can either set it to have the same results for all of them or have different results. So the same result is off at the moment. If I scroll down and execute, I have the choice of displaying either lists or relative frequencies. If I stick to a list, I have dice A and dice B with the outputs, and it gives me a list of sums and differences as well. If you would like the relative frequency, I can go back and choose that instead. This allows me to investigate either the sums or the differences. So for the sums, I can see that the sums start at 2 and would go all the way up to 12, as we have the numbers 1 to 6 on the dice. We have our frequencies and the calculated relative frequencies as well. And you can also do it for the differences if you want. So notice the output, the differences are slightly different. You can do a very similar thing when you use, instead of dice roll, coin toss. So if we go back and choose coin toss, again, you can choose between 1 and 3 coins. I'm going to use 3 in this case. And the attempts are between 1 and 250 again. Same result is off. And when I execute, I get the same options, lists or relative frequencies. If I choose list, there are my 3 coins. There's only 2 options, heads or tails. It doesn't matter which is shaded or unshaded. So you have coin A, coin B, coin C, and then it gives you a sum of, in this case, the shaded ones. So you could denote whether heads or tails is shaded or not. Alternatively, we can go back and use relative frequency. Choose that. And we get, in this case, shaded 0 time, shaded 1 time, frequency and relative frequency. So very similar, allowing you to work out probabilities perhaps from this in a nice, quiet fashion. One brand new thing that is also quite relevant is that we have number line. Okay, let's go back, scroll down and choose number line with OK. Now this allows you to draw up to 3 number lines at the same time and investigate them. So what we can do is enter our number lines, A, B, or C. If we scroll across or press OK, we get various options. So here we have inequalities, strict inequalities or equations. Let's enter x is less than 3 for our first number line. So let's choose that with OK and then enter a particular value. That is 3. Press OK. This allows you to confirm that number line. So x is now less than 3. If we'd like to draw some more number lines, let's select B with OK. Now this is a greater than -4. So let's scroll down to greater than, select with OK. And -4, we've not mentioned this before, but the negative is actually a label on subtract. So shift and subtract. And then 4. And then confirm that with OK, and then confirm the line again. And finally, for C, let's do a value between. So we can use page scroll now to get to the between values. It is just between and not equal to. So select the correct inequality. This is -5, so let's do negative again, and 5. Confirm that. So that is the lower bound. The upper bound is B, and that is 2. Confirm all of those. And then when you execute, it draws the number lines for you, and you can now investigate them. Notice the correct notation such that it is either excluded or included with the shaded circles. Finally, there is the Circle app. So if I go back again, scroll down to Circle, this is quite nice when investigating trigonometry. We have choices for either the unit circle or the half circle or a clock. So the unit circle is 360 degrees, half circle obviously 180. You can enter 2 different angles. So if I enter 60 and 120 perhaps, when I then execute, what this allows you to do is compare what happens when you do sine and cosine and tan of these angles. So sine of 60, angle number 1, is root 3 over 2. Cos of 60 is a half, and tan of 60 is root 3. If I scroll down, it changes to the second angle, and then you can see that sine of 120 has the same value. So it allows you to make make the connections between different angles and their trig values. So that's quite nice. Works exactly the same way for the half circle. However, if we go back, I actually quite like the clock option. What happens now is that we'll display an analog clock face with an hour hand and a minute hand, and you can use the scroll keys to move the hour hand and see the total angle. So here we have 60 and 360 at 10 o'clock. Quite nice. So there you have it. That's an explanation of all of the new functionality, just in brief mode though, just to demonstrate how to navigate around the handset and where the various functionality is so that you can find it. Last thing I can refer you to is that it may be useful for you to use the ClassPad platform. You can see the emulator on your screens. That is housed within the ClassPad platform and allows you to do various things on a display if you are interested. There are plenty of resources available on YouTube and also on Twitter. We are looking at the start of the year, so back to school. We have these familiarization webinars. There is also the launch of some revision and get to know your calculator worksheets. There are key skills videos available on the website, and teaching and learning videos are going to be launched soon. And there is a very helpful interactive manual. So if you're wondering what a particular key does, you can just press it and it will take you to a screen that explains what it does. Okay, so please have a look at the website, check out the available resources, and that is it for this evening.